Hello, and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 169. Have you ever met a biracial choir unicorn? With Kelsey Burkett. Well, I don't know if you've met one, but now I have, and so can you. In this conversation, I welcome Kelsey Burkett to discuss the magical, mystical world in which she teaches choir. I was floored to hear about the way her district structures their choral program, but like many Choralosophy conversations, these are unscripted, and we ended up spending quite a bit of time talking about our own self-conceptions, and in Kelsey getting a chance to share very vulnerably, I really appreciated her personal identity and our thoughts about the ways that we can move our inclusion conversations in music education and education more generally forward to a place of greater empathy, understanding, and progress. We also discussed the ways in which racial bias can manifest in school systems and much more. Kelsey is very open about her own identity crisis as a biracial woman and how that identity has evolved over time. I believe it is this very identity journey that equips Kelsey to approach this issue with compassion for others. Tune in for this conversation with a colleague I think we should all get to know. The school year has started for most of us, but it is not too late to get your Sight Reading Factory routine daily going, and it's also not too late to get each of your students their own membership so that they can practice at home and you can turn your choir into the sight reading machine that you want it to be. So go to sightreadingfactory.com, get set up today, and use Choralosophy at checkout to get 10% off. Don't forget to head over to the TikTok, a Choralosophy podcast account, which is growing leaps and bounds over there as we begin adding live rehearsal clips as well as clips from here on the show. So head over to the TikTok account at Choralosophy Podcast and check it out. Are you tired of managing multiple platforms to sell tickets, fundraise, and market your performances? Look no further than Ludus.com, an all-in-one solution that's easy to use and free to your organization. With Ludus, you'll have access to a suite of tools and resources specifically designed for the performing arts. From ticket sales to merchandise and fundraising, Ludus has got you covered. So why not give it a try? Save time, money, and resources. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/Choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. The Choralosophy podcast continues to be free, and I'm working hard every week to provide this free content, but some of you, many of you, have decided, hey, I want to chip in financially to help make sure that the expenses of this show are covered, and just to say thank you to Chris for doing all of this stuff. If that's you, you can go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and sign up for as little as $3 a month. There are, of course, various levels that you can join, and at the producer or above level, we have Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, John Warner, Jonah Clixbull, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kikachik. Head to patreon.com/Choralosophy and join the crowd. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Kelsey Burkett, and we're going to be discussing a variety of things related to our classroom philosophies. And so, Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
That's awesome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you first? So where are you, and what's kind of your background that leads you to being a choir teacher?
Yeah, I am in Hilliard, Ohio, which is the first suburb you hit on the west side of Columbus. And I've been in Hilliard City Schools for about 18 years. And I teach middle school choir, where I have 2 treble choirs and a tenor-based choir that my co-teacher, Jeremy Witt, coaches. We also have a huge a cappella program, contemporary a cappella program, that is made up of 4 contemporary a cappella groups, grades 7 through 12. And then our high school program at Hilliard Bradley High School has 5 curricular choirs as well. So we're very busy, and we have a lot of kids, which is super fun and keeps us on our toes. I went to Capital University, also here in Columbus, where I sang in the chapel choir. I also did my master's at Capital through their music education program, as well as got my Kodai certification through their Kodai program, which they're pretty well known for both their undergrad and master's programs with Kodai. And I know we're going to dive into my Instagram handle a little bit too. And I was adopted into a transracial family. My parents are white. I am not. But I had a musical gift. No one in my family is musical except for my grandmother. She could play piano by ear. But I have a bunch of engineers and athletes in my family, and they didn't know what to do with me for a little bit, but my parents were amazing parents and just kept putting me into things. And we found that music was my thing. And here I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So before we get to that, the Instagram handle, I'm curious a little bit more about your program that you work in. The way it's structured. You mentioned having a lot of choirs and a lot of different types of choirs. There's another choir teacher there with you. How does that all work? So like, what's your day? What's your daily schedule like?
Yeah, so there's actually three of us running the 7th through 12th program, and then we
Oh
have
wow.
one teacher running our 6th grade program. Um, so we've basically worked it out that every single kid at least sees one of us every single day. I'm solely responsible for the 7th grade treble choir. One of my co-teachers, Alyssa Schott, she comes over and assists with our 8th grade treble choir. She also runs our freshman treble choir and our um, middle level chorale, which is a treble based ensemble. Then Jeremy Witt, our other co-teacher, he comes over and sees our tenor bass choir, and then he runs co-teaches the top choir, symphonic choir at the high school with Alyssa, co-teaches that, and then also does the freshman tenor bass choir at the high school level. And then we each have our own a cappella group that we coach, and then we all three of us coach Shades of Blue a cappella, which is our premier a cappella group at the high school level. And then Alyssa and I both travel to our 6th grade building once a week to assist Joy Grubbs, who is our 6th grade. So we are very busy.
That is fascinating. I don't know that I've ever heard about a multiple level, and it is public school, right?
It's public school. I'll be really honest with you. We are so lucky. Uh,
Yeah.
Jeremy and Alyssa are both younger than me. When I first started teaching, we didn't really have the structure. I definitely assisted at the high school, but it was my dream to have a really cohesive team. And so we had some structure changes about 4 years ago, and Jeremy came in as the head director. And he and I get along so well. He's one of my dearest friends. And we had a lot of really intentional conversations about what we wanted, what would our dream be for our ideal program. We knew we were going to get to hire a third person because our numbers constituted it. Bradley High School opened about 13 years ago. And so it built itself as the third high school in our district. And so with a lot of conversations with administration, we have a wonderful district music supervisor that's such a great advocate and voice for us. We said, this is what we want in a person. This is what we're looking for. And so we were able, Jeremy and I also honestly really got to pick Alyssa. Our principals are in, but we were in on the interview process and got to pick her and create this team that I'm really, really proud of.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
it sounds, I mean, are you as the choir teachers in that district, are you kind of getting to decide who goes where when to tackle all these levels, or does
Yeah.
that all?
Yeah. So all of the music teachers we sit down and every spring, we do something called Hilliard U, which is our big professional development day across the entire district. And so every department gets to have intentional planning time. And so our music supervisor brings every single music teacher, and there's probably about 60 music teachers total in our district. And we all get to sit down and plan out our schedules. And so Joy, our 6th grade teacher, she says, here's what I need. We look at our schedules and say, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, and we make our schedules.
That's incredible.
It is.
You are very lucky. That's a
We are. I check my privilege often.
man. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that I talk about a lot about where I teach that I feel lucky too.
Hmm.
But that's actually one of the areas, one of the types of things that I've always been frustrated with where I teach is that I'm 9 through 12. We have people who are 6 through 8. The people who are 9 through 12 in my district, yeah, we have our own challenges, but we have a lot less students than the 6 through
Hmm.
8 people do. Yet there's no structural support in place for a high school person to have time during the day to go help some of
Hmm.
those 6 through 8 people. And when you guys talked, just a second ago, you were talking about it as like we talked about how we want to build a program.
Hmm.
I'm like, well, we don't have that concept. I have a program that starts when they get to me in ninth grade. But
Yeah.
I don't get to think of it in a structural way as a program that includes 6th graders and 7th graders that are building up skills to get to me, or nor do they know me before they even get to ninth grade. You know,
Sure.
I can go down there and like do a concert or go down and visit for a day or whatever, but that's not the same.
Hmm.
So man, that's really cool. That's
Yeah.
very awesome.
Hmm.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the contemporary a cappella groups. Are those extracurricular?
All three of the four are. We have Echo and Wave, which are at the high school. Echo is a mixed group. Wave is our treble group because we always have more treble singers than we do mixed. So we have that at the high school level. And then Blue Notes is our middle school group, which is a mixed voice group. Shades of Blue a cappella used to be purely extracurricular, but as they grew, as we advanced them along, they became a co-curricular group. So they every kid who does a cappella also has to be in a curricular choir. So the kids that are in Shades of Blue, we have 17. They are in one of the curricular choirs at the high school, and then they also make room in their schedule to be in Shades of Blue, which meets at the end of the day, every day.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hmm.
That's awesome. So, okay. So, um, tell me, let's go there now into your, I came across you first on Instagram.
Yeah,
You are the biracial choir unicorn, is that
I
right?
am. That's me.
So the biracial part is obvious. It's like a little bit easier to interpret, but why the unicorn? Why are you a unicorn?
I think my story is pretty rare. I've been told that it could be a movie uh,
Okay.
by a couple of people, so I'll dive into it if you want to know a
Yes,
little bit
please.
more. So as I mentioned earlier, my brother and I are both transracial adoptees. We were both adopted as infants. My mom flew to Kansas and picked me up at 2 days old, and my brother very similarly was adopted as like I think he was about 5 days old. My brother and I are not biologically related, but people say we look alike. So I don't know if there's
Okay. Yeah.
that. So we always knew we were adopted. That was never something my parents hid from us. Um, and over time, so it was just something normal. But once I got into public school and kids started asking questions, I started feeling very odd about it. Um, we lived in a small town until I was in the seventh grade. It was my dad's hometown, so everyone knew the Burkett name and knew who we were. My dad and uncles were all jocks and stars in their high school, and so people knew us. And my grandmother was a really beloved teacher at the elementary school. And I have a core memory as a third grader. A new kid moved in, and I said, "Oh, that's my grandma." And he said, "She's not your grandma." And I said, "What do you mean she's not my grandma?" He's like, "You're not the same color. She can't be your grandma." And I was devastated. I went home and he's like, "We're not the same color. We don't match, so we can't be related." And I had all the, and my parents were ready for those conversations. And so, we learned very soon that genetics don't make a family and love makes a
Right.
family. And that's something I grew up with knowing in my and as I grew up, we moved away from West Virginia, moved to Solon, Ohio, which is a large suburb of Cleveland, way more diverse than what I had experienced as a kid. I was the diversity as a kid.
Right.
Moving to Solon, not so much anymore. I started to experience what I now know was colorism. At the time, I didn't really know what was happening because I wasn't being accepted by people who I was finally excited to see. I was finally excited to see other brown faces in my classroom, but they weren't accepting me. And
Right.
I got a lot of bullying. I got called the N word with a W. I got called Oreo. I got called all these things and I didn't understand them. And they were saying, "You're white, but you're black. Like, what's wrong with you? Why do you talk the way you talk?" And I didn't understand any of them. Like, I just talk the way I talk. I don't know. And so it's something I really struggled with. Like, what is my identity? Where do I fit in? I had a very diverse group of friends. My high school was predominantly Jewish, so we had Jewish people, Christian people, Mormon people. We were every color in my friend group, but I still never truly felt a part of Black people. And honestly, it wasn't until about 2020 that I really started to take a hard look as to who I am and what defines me. And I did my ancestry DNA. I wanted to find out, like, where do I come from? Where are my ancestors? And so I did my ancestry DNA, found out I am 25% Irish, 25% British, and 50% Nigerian. And they can trace my ancestors back to the enslaved people that came to the United States. And that like hit my heart. I was like, wow, like I am Black because I could trace myself to that. I don't know why it felt like that to me, but it did. And um, a lot of therapy. I found a really amazing therapist who's also biracial, and we've been able to really unpack a lot of the experiences I've had. Through that ancestry DNA test, I also connected to my birth family and found out that my birth mother was very young. She was 14 years old. She was white, and she came from a family that was very racist and um, hid her pregnancy pretty much the whole time. And they wanted to, once I was born, they wanted me to be with a white family. My Black side of the family knew about me, but never knew what happened to me, which I found to be devastating to know that there's someone out there that you're blood related to, but you don't know if they're okay. You don't know what happened to them. And so we were able to connect through that. And unfortunately, my birth father passed away just this past summer. My birth mother had a lot of drug issues and died at a very young age, about at 35. Um, and so it just really made me take stock of how lucky I am to have been placed with the family I was placed with, but also really loving the story that I've come with. And I can tell you right now, I would not be in the place I am if it wasn't for every single one of those people, whether it be my birth mother who suffered in silence through a pregnancy. And I just, especially now teaching 13 and 14-year-olds, I just can't imagine going through something like that at that age. Um, so I think I'm pretty unique in my story. And so that's where the unicorn came. I also call my daughter a unicorn because she was never, I have a lot of fertility issues and reproductive issues. And so she's a bit of a unicorn because we never thought we would have her. And she came out with blue eyes and light brown hair that turns blonde, but
Yeah.
has my complexion. So yeah, we're just a little family of unicorns. So that's where it came from.
That's an amazing story. That really
Thank
is.
you.
And I have lots of questions if you're open to them
Go for it. Yeah.
about all of that. So, first thing, there's so many. I don't know. I have to ask. Have you heard any of the? Have you heard any of my content on the fascinating ways that we talk about race? Have we
So
talked
I
about?
actually was just watching your video interview with Zenaida Robles today, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought the question that hit me, and I've like even been unpacking it for the last 4 hours when she asked you how you feel as a white man when people say we don't need your voice anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. It's something I'm very aware of because I'm very assertive and aggressive in my philosophies. And I sometimes worry I step on the shoes of other people, particularly even my coach teachers. I never want them to feel uncomfortable in my crusade of awareness, to feel like I don't hear or see them, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. No, it does. That's really great. I don't know where this interest comes from as far as the philosophy part of it. For me, I've always been fascinated by race and genealogy and genetics and just the human species and how we are the way we are. And of course, one of the things that we know is that race is not really a biological category. It's more of a socially constructed category. These are labels that we place upon each other and on ourselves. And so I'm interested in how you use the term that you were adopted by you were transracial adoptee. When you say transracial, what do you mean when you say that?
That I am a different color than the rest of my family
I
is really
see.
what it means
Okay.
to
Yep. All
me.
right. So it's not a commentary on the adopted family. It's just it's a way to place you as not the same racial background as your adopted family. I get it.
Correct.
Okay. So the next question then would be like, so as you tell your story, I was just thinking about how interesting it was that your story is, to me, a perfect example of the kind of the silliness of the social construction of race, in the
Mhm.
sense that the categories break down so quickly when people are quote unquote interracial married, and
Mhm.
then what race is their kid, and then they have a kid with maybe somebody from a different genetic background, and then what you call what that kid, and then you you can
Right.
really very quickly go down a rabbit hole of like none of these categories make sense. While
Right.
on the flip side, you also, though, can very, from your story, have a real, very real sense of how powerful and impactful those social categories that have been placed on us are, because they impacted you as a kid. Those things were used as a weapon to make you feel bad when you were little. So even though it's not like quote unquote real in the biological sense, it can be very real to kids that are growing up being kind of having their racial makeup pushed in their face all the time. Thoughts about that. Those were kind of my thoughts as I was hearing your story. Choralosophy listeners will remember RyanMain.com, but he has recently created EndeavorMusicPublishing.com, which is something different, something bigger, and something better. Endeavor is not a marketplace. It's a traditional publisher with a 21st century business model, which means that they have editing. Each piece is chosen and selected with accessibility in mind. Endeavor supports composers with a majority of the sales going right to the composer. Plus, there are tons of voicings to fit the needs of your program, instant downloads, full recordings, practice materials, and more. So head over to EndeavorMusicPublishing.com now and check out the catalog.
Yeah, I think that is where we're on a slippery slope with how we're teaching kids about race. We see a lot of talk about we don't want to make white children feel guilty for being white. And like I said, I'm very careful about the intention in which I work and talk through these messages. And I think we need to be careful of when we talk to white children that we don't make them feel guilty. Do we want them to have empathy? Absolutely. But we also want our children of color to have empathy for our white friends as well. We have to all have we have to have empathy for everyone. It's not just a white, black, brown thing. You know, social construct of racism and race are not going to go away. What I think we can improve is having conversations about it that are healthy and constructive, just like you and I are doing right now. It's funny because, and this is something I've unpacked in therapy, is even though I grew up understanding I was a different color, we talked about that, things arose, I still felt uncomfortable talking about race for a really long time and felt shame with it. And I didn't understand why. I was like, why do I feel this shame? Why? This is who I am. Like, I am this color. This is the way I'm built. My family is white. Like, I can say those things. But then when it comes to having a real conversation with someone about it, I feel guilty. But at the same, so I realized, like, I was also taught at the same time, yes, while you're a different color, it's also rude and bad manners to talk about race. Um, or I very much heard my parents say, hey, we don't see color. Wait, mom, that doesn't make sense because you told me I'm a different color. It's this weird double-edged sword we get where we're told, ooh, we don't want to see color, but yet we need to have conversations. And when we sweep things under the rug, that's when that shame and that guilt and that hesitancy comes on. So,
yeah, no, and I agree with you that, well, I don't know, maybe I mostly agree with you when you say that the social construction of race is not going to go away. I mostly agree. I don't think it'll go away in our lifetime, but I do. Well, think about it this way. So the social construction of race that we think of today in terms of the big categories of colors like white, black, brown, what race are you? Oh, I'm black. Or what race are you? I'm white. Well, those categories are only about 500 years old. So for most of human history, those categories didn't exist. So if for me to imagine that they are permanent now forever doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If I'm going to zoom out 10,000 years, if I'm going to zoom out 20,000 years, there's this concept that is only about 500 years old, and then I imagine like somebody's going to make up some other categories, and so in other words, the thing that I think is permanent for humans though is that we will come up with some categories to divide and subjugate each other and to put each other down and to put each other into groups of like privileged versus not privileged or whatever. I just don't know that it will forever be those colors, the red, brown, white, black. We've always come up with something throughout human history, but it's always been different things. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think those are a lot of really good points. I think a lot of times with race and please tell me how you feel about this as a white person.
Yeah.
I feel like so much of color is wrapped up in identity.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I struggled growing up is because I was mixed. Where was my identity? What did I identify as? I felt like I needed to identify myself as a Black woman, even though I didn't necessarily feel like a Black woman. I do very much now embrace my Blackness, but I tell you, I identify as a biracial woman.
Right.
So I think that's maybe why we categorize ourselves a little bit, is that's identity.
Yeah, you're right. There's another guest I had on the show is Dr. Sheena Mason. She's not a choir person. She's a person who studies this exact thing. I highly recommend that episode
Mhm.
to you to go back and check. It's episode 113, and she's also a biracial woman, and kind of arrived at some of the same conclusions, but from the perspective of somebody who studies
Mm,
um, race and racism and the history of it and the appearances of it in literature throughout her throughout time, and she's a really
mhm,
fascinating character. But one of the things that I learned from her in that conversation is that one of the things that happens a lot in these conversations is we use the word race
mm,
when what we really mean is culture, or what
mm,
we really mean is ancestry or
mhm,
family lineage. Or some mixture of all those things, even though that isn't really a precisely race, but we just use that word. We've
mm,
been kind of taught to use that word. And I think where I think it's an interesting thing to dissect is that if, for example, you asked how I feel as a white person, I don't. Maybe I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm such a nerd about this that
mhm,
I read about it and I listen to people studying it. A book called Racecraft is another one that I
mm,
recommend. A fantastic book by Barbara and Karen Fields, another couple race scholars.
mhm,
But the one of the things that I think about as a white person is that I don't think that I am white because I don't think white is a real thing.
mm,
We in America we invented white
mhm,
essentially as a category. You have to remember too, though, that what we count as white is always changing. So,
mhm,
like 100 years ago, Italians weren't white.
mhm,
They were an ethnic minority that was marginalized, and
mhm.
now you'd look at them and we would see an Italian person and we would lump them together
You're the white person,
with
right?
with a white person. So those things are constantly changing. I identify personally as an American.
Mhm,
If somebody wanted to be more specific, I'm a Midwestern American. Well,
mhm,
what color skin do most Midwestern Americans have?
mhm,
We have white skin, and so then we get lumped into to a category. And so I agree with you. Like I totally agree with you that like finding those points of identity are really really important. I guess I just think it's interesting to think about like what are the ways that we can identify that are transcendent, I guess. Because I think and I of course I don't ever begrudge anybody their own identity. I think however people come up with like a way to categorize themselves. Now I will also say that I know there's some people who are listening to this will go, oh my goodness, when is he going to acknowledge that part of it is like I don't have to think about race because it's not put in my face all the time. I
mhm,
get that. Trust me, I get it. But it's like if I have a privilege, like if I get to check my privilege, it's that while I'm not busy having to defend like my racial, I don't know, view from other people, then I get to think about other things, and I get to, hopefully leads to good conversations with people. So, what are your when you started? You said in 2020, you started to think about some things differently. Now, was that related to just being home from the pandemic and all the racial stuff that happened in 2020? Tell me a little bit about what happened in 2020 that caused you to start rethinking some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, it was yeah, lots of time to sit and think and do cross stitch.
Yep.
That's what I
Yep.
did. That was my
Hmm.
pandemic craft, was cross stitch. I even got a headlamp. I was like really for it. But my daughter's father is Black, and he is from inner city Detroit and Muskegon, Michigan. And one of the things that we always butted heads over was the topic of race, because I would get really frustrated with him because I felt like sometimes he didn't understand where I was coming from.
Mm.
I realized during 2020, as I watched what was happening with George Floyd, as I watched Breonna Taylor as I watched over and over and over again these examples of police brutality, that the experience that I had discounted his experiences as a Black man.
Ah, yeah,
And I felt so bad. And he and I had a really long conversation about it. And I realized that in the times he was with my family, he was deeply uncomfortable, um, because he didn't feel like I was in his corner. And he's 6'6", he's Black, he's a big guy. I would witness, we would go out and people would be like, "Oh, you're big. Did you play basketball?" That's the first question people asked him.
right.
Yeah, he did play basketball. He also has a master's degree. He owns his own business, and like he's an amazing human being. Like, and it just, I saw those things where like immediately he was judged, from that first instance. We had a situation once where we were out and he was approached by the police. We were just out and they started questioning him about something he had nothing to do with. I had never experienced anything like that before. And so witnessing that really changed my viewpoint. And it was amazing to me that here we are, two people that are brown skinned, we're about the same complexion, had lived in two different Americas. I've definitely experienced racism over the years, but it was nothing compared to what he had witnessed. And so having those conversations with him and seeing it firsthand really helped me kind of rethink some things. I also had within our district, we had a big moment too where we realized our district had some work to do. While we are a very large district of almost 17,000 students, there are only 32 teachers of color in my entire district.
Wow.
And, we had a kind of a come to Jesus moment where our district made an effort to do something and create a task force, and it failed. They didn't ask any of the teachers of color to be on it. And so myself and a couple colleagues banded together and wrote a letter to the district, and we had 500 of our colleagues sign it, and it was terrifying. And we sent it to our superintendent and our board, our school board, and said, these are the things that we see that we want to have fixed. And it was a really scary moment. I didn't know what the pushback would be, what the response would be, but out of that we formed something called the Hilliard BIPOC Alliance. And so it's a support group for our teachers of color. And we work really closely with our DEI coordinator, doing just having social hours and time to talk to each other, making initiatives to work on hiring more teachers of color within our district. And then the biggest thing we've done is established a scholarship fund for BIPOC graduates of the Hilliard City Schools. So 3 years later, we've already been able to give away $2,000 in scholarships to BIPOC graduates from Hilliard City Schools. So it's something I'm really proud of, but it was definitely a journey to get here.
So can I ask on this? This is interesting too. You're an enigma wrapped in riddles. This is great. So when you did this letter, what were some? Can you give me an example or two of what you wrote to the district that needed to change?
Yeah, we said first the hiring practices were extremely biased and did not give opportunity for teachers of color to get even into an initial interview process. We also called out that we were not a welcoming environment for teachers of color, that there was a reputation for Hilliard City Schools in the area, that it was not a place for teachers of color to work. We talked a lot about curriculum and things that were offered to students, incidents of racism and bias that had happened in our district that were swept under the rug. We also talked about the disproportionate discipline numbers we had, still have, in our district towards students of color.
Okay, so when you talk about the not being a welcoming environment for teachers of color, what contributes to that? Is that personal behaviors?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, personal behaviors. It's funny. I can think of multiple incidents for me where I got called out for mentioning race in my classroom.
Ah.
in a non, when that, I'll give you an example. We did a spiritual. The name of it has just left my mind, and I am deeply embarrassed. Go where I send thee. So
Okay, great.
sorry.
Yeah.
And I said something along the lines of like, this is a song that would be sung in Black churches and African American churches, and we need to respect that. And did a little bit of a history on that because that's what you're supposed to do when you teach these songs. I got called into an administrator's office, and I was told to make my language less colorful.
Oh, wow.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah. So things like that. I have colleagues, one of my closest, my co-chair and one of my close friends. She is a brilliant educator. She's been awarded both state and nationally for being educator of the year as a language arts teacher. And she had an administrator that told her she was a terrible person. Like straight up told her she was a bad teacher and a terrible person and that she couldn't control her classroom. And like,
Wow.
how is that okay? But yet, white teachers who are not as good as her have never had that said to them.
Wow. Yeah, that's terrible, and I think we've had definitely where I live, we've gone through some similar, I guess, pulling certain things out from under the rug, so to speak, or shaking out the rug
Right.
to talk about some of those types of things. And of course, where I teach, I teach in the town I grew up in, and when I was in high school, we were probably, oh my goodness, the entire town was probably 97% white,
Hmm.
which is, I will say, it is no one's fault in the sense that that's just like sometimes
Is what
regions
it
look,
is.
yep, it
Yeah.
is just is what it is. But of course that created a bias bubble
Hmm.
of like this is just the way it's supposed to be.
You're in your echo chamber.
Yes, correct.
Hmm.
And then, but over the last 20 years, since I graduated from high school and then went to college, and 25 years or so that since I've been graduated and have been teaching now in this town, the demographics of the town have drastically changed.
Hilliard's exactly the same way. Yep.
Yep, yep, and it's now we're actually on average about as diverse as the country, so about
Hmm.
70% ish, 65% white and
Hmm.
70% non-white, and so it's been an interesting thing to see all those things happen. And what's interesting too is I'm sure, like everywhere, people are embroiled in a lot of kind of controversy about the way that we have these conversations. And you mentioned earlier, and I want to get your thoughts because it's kind of, I'm backpedaling now a little bit in the conversation, but you mentioned the importance of, or that some people are really sensitive to the idea of not making white kids feel guilty about being white.
Hmm.
And I want to drill into that because I actually think that there is underneath that criticism is a legitimate concern,
Hmm.
and but it's that there is a lot of, even amongst educators who are well-meaning, there is a lot of I feel misuse of and misunderstanding of concepts of how to discuss race and racism that contribute to some of those things. So I actually was involved in an argument about this very thing on Facebook today,
Hmm.
and one of the sources of that was that, for example, we the way we have conversations about the bad things that white people have done,
Hmm.
okay, is, in my opinion, yes, you talk about those bad things. You talk about those bad things, but you have to be quite careful with how we racialize and generalize people by demographics.
Hmm.
In the same way that if I were to say, well, black people are more likely to be criminals.
Hmm.
Okay, well, okay, but why? And then somebody might say, usually a right wing person would say, well, there's like, of all the crime committed, violent crime, half of it's committed by people of color or black people. And I'd say, oh, okay, so you think that means that if you're black, you're more likely to be a criminal? Well, yeah, that's what that means. Well, no, that's not what that means. That's not what that means. That's just statistics 101. It's not racism versus not racism. It's just statistics. A tiny, tiny fraction of black people commit crimes. A tiny, tiny fraction. So if you're actually more likely to not be a criminal, if you
Right.
if you are right, but in the same way, we make that mistake when we talk about the history of different things that white people have done. We're making the
Mhm.
same mistake. And so it's a I think when parents and sometimes adults too are hearing these conversations, they don't hear people being careful enough to say,
Mhm.
there's lots of things that the different groups of people have done, and you could average them all out and put them all in the same category by what they look like, or you could decide to not do that. Like
Right.
you could decide that ultimately we're all individuals. We are all individuals. We're impacted by the things that people around us do for sure, but we are vastly complex. We are vastly varied within groups. There's way more that we have in common than things
Mhm.
that we have that is different. And so I think if people could have a conversation, the way I always think of it is, yeah, let's talk about the evils of racism. Absolutely. And let's teach it at school. And let's teach it without being ashamed to teach it.
Mhm.
But let's remind those kids that we're teaching that this past does not predict your future.
100%. Well,
The-
I
it-
think what you just said there is exactly what we should be telling our children,
yes.
that we are
Mm-hmm.
deeply complex human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing we can do when we meet a person is say, I see you. I see what you are on the outside. I want to get to know you on the inside and unpack all of those things and see what makes you a whole person.
Yes.
The thing that is interesting to me in the education system, and I know the way history is taught has even changed a little bit, but why are we as a country able to so easily teach the atrocities of the Holocaust and the atrocities of World War I and World War II? And, at least when I was growing up, those were big lessons I learned.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we can't teach the atrocities of our own country. Um, or we can't be honest about the atrocities of our own country. Um, I learned about the Holocaust and I never went around saying, well, all Germans are bad. Like it was never anything that entered into my mind because the way I was taught about it.
Right.
Um, and so I don't know, that's always just been something that I've thought about a lot too. I also wonder sometimes, I think it comes down to how people are raised in their own homes. My father, he was born in 1955, and they lived in Tennessee when he was a child. He and my uncle went to the very first desegregated elementary school in the state of Tennessee.
Wow.
So here I am, one generation removed away from someone who was living in that moment. Now, he was like 7 years old. So it was not strange to him that he was in school with Black kids. They also had moved down to that area from Niagara Falls, which was obviously very northern. So he didn't grow up in Southern culture and everything that Southern culture brought with race relations. But my grandmother tells me a story is when they did move to that area. My grandfather worked for Union Carbide, and so the company sent over a Black woman to help her unpack the house. She was pregnant with my dad's youngest brother. My dad are 7, 6, and 3 were her 3 other kids, and so she had a lot to do, and she needed help. And she invited the woman to stay for lunch, and she tells the story that she stayed, but she never came back afterwards because she was so terrified that someone would find out that she had food at the same table as a white family and that she was going to be harmed because of that. And my grandmother didn't understand that. So to hear stories like that and know that that was just one generation tells me that we have a lot of conversations to have with our kids, both as parents and as educators. And yeah, I think it's hard because I do think those conversations do start at home, but we have to have them at school too because these kids are interacting with each other every single day and stuff happens in school. These kids say things and some of the things they say are not okay and they need to know why it's not okay.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, I wish, I don't know. This is probably, I am not gonna. I don't think my wish will come true on this particular aspect, but I wish that we would teach all those things. But I also wish that we would teach, and the reason. So, bad thing happened. Dot dot dot. And the
Mhm.
reason that it happened is because our ancestors and sometimes even people today have a
Mhm.
mistaken belief that we are, as humans, divided up into racial categories that can be hierarchically organized
Mhm.
because that isn't real. we have put that upon
Made a
each other.
choice to make it real.
We made a choice to
Hmm.
do that, and at some point, like we said, maybe that doesn't go away in our lifetime. But the way I believe it is that if we don't start teaching kids at some point that that was a mistaken belief, that that's actually not true, and we could even maybe talk about the biology of why that's not true, and the genetics of why that's not true, and because keep in mind, like those categories were taught to kids hundreds of years ago as
Hmm.
biologically true. Like
Hmm.
they were taught that black people, it's okay to keep them as slaves because they're not actually fully human.
Hmm.
And it's like we're learning that in science,
Right.
you know. And so like we're going to have to use science and we're going to have to
Hmm.
use logic and reason and those types of things to teach people that those beliefs are false. And then maybe a generation from now, or two generations, or three or four, or whatever. I don't know. That's just my pipe dream, like
Hmm.
my dream that we're going to have to teach our way out of those things. Thoughts about that?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite quotes, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, was science is never done.
Right. Yeah.
Science is always evolving and finding out new things, and it's so great to see what science has discovered. And I even think sometimes with DEI work, science is what gets through to people's heads. Right now, we are working with someone who is doing her PhD in neuroscience, and so all of her DEI philosophy has been pulled out of um, neurodiversity and trauma within the brain, and how we get stuck in our limbic system when we're having these emotional, intense conversations, and we can't get out of that limbic system to get into that reasonable thought. And then when we're teaching kids who are in an undeveloped limbic system, then it becomes this whole thing. And so I think that science is going to be a huge component into changing people's ideas about what racial construct is in human
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
Um, I also think even it's been interesting. I think a lot too as a parent now. It's even changed the way I think as a teacher. When my daughter comes home and like she started coming on, she'll be 5 in November, and she's already said things to me like, "I'm brown. I'm the only brown student in my class." Like she's already noticed that.
Oh
And I've
yeah.
never really dug into it with her, but I'm like, did she realize she's brown or did someone tell her she's brown? Or is she noticing that these kids are different colors? So already these kids are noticing things that are different about each other. When they say that to us, then how do we go from there? For now, I've just said to her, yeah, you are brown. Mommy's brown too. Who else is brown? Daddy's brown. Well, Grammy's not brown. No, she's not. Uncle John's brown. Yep, he's brown too. And that's just what we do. That's just what we talk. And she realizes we're all still family.
Right.
We're just different. So I'll be curious to see for her even too as how she grows. I didn't grow up, like I said, I didn't grow up with a lot of that, but you know, you see more and more kids who are from so many different backgrounds and they acknowledge that. And I see that in my students too. They acknowledge things a lot more than I ever did when I was their age.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good story too. I have a similar story with my daughter, but I think one of the things um, that is interesting about the history of all this is that you can go. I mentioned the categories of race are about 500 years old, a little bit more than that now. But the idea of using racial, or sorry, not racial, but color, using color as a descriptor, like
Hmm.
just saying, oh, that's that black guy over there, or that white person over there. That's thousands of years old. People have been
Hmm.
doing that for a long, long time. But it's newer to attach that to an identity, like that
Hmm.
I am black or I am
Hmm.
white, rather than I'm a person who happens to be black, or I'm a person who has black skin, or black hair, or
Hmm.
whatever. Those things are newer, and I think kids inherently notice the similarities and differences, and they will start to point them out and talk about them because they haven't been taught yet that it's rude.
Hmm.
In other words, it's just, oh, I'm just noticing details.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
my daughter was probably 5, maybe 4, and on the playground in my neighborhood, we have a little sandbox and swing set and stuff, and she was playing there, and there was a little black girl there that was playing, and they played in their sandbox together, and they shared toys, and they probably 20 to 30 minutes was all they were there at the same time,
Hmm.
and we were walking home. And I said, "Oh, did you have fun at the park?" And she said, my daughter said, "Yeah, I met a friend." And I said, "Oh, did you make friends already? That was really fast." And she said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "Why are you friends with her already?" And she goes, "Oh, we both have ponytails."
Yeah. Kids are awesome.
Yeah, her instinct was to find what was the same.
Mhm.
And of course, later on, eventually, she's going to have it. She's going to notice other things like why you're different, and those types of things. But I just think it's interesting because kids, they haven't been fully imprinted yet with this social
Mhm.
construct.
Mhm.
By a young age, it takes a little while. Like that, yeah, they notice difference, but they've not. You have to be taught
Mhm.
the hierarchy. You have to be taught
Right.
like the racial hierarchy, and I think that's kind of why I have this belief that we have to unteach it. Like we have to
Have
very
to dismantle it. Absolutely.
yes, we have to like
Absolutely.
very intentionally teach people that in what way it's wrong, but with being very very sensitive to not demonizing
Correct.
people because I just believe that like if you want to lose the battle of what you're trying to convince people to do, tell them that they're evil because they will ignore you so fast.
Mhm.
That's what humans do.
Yeah. When I think even too, racism is such a moral issue.
Yeah, for sure.
To be racist is a moral failing for a lot of
Hmm.
people.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine as a white person, if someone is standing in front of you teaching you something and saying, you're racist, or you're interpreting it as saying is you're racist because you are something, that hurts people's hearts and that hits them to their core,
Yeah.
and that will shut them down. They will not listen to another word you say in that session if that is how they feel, if they feel attacked.
Right. Yeah, and I think a different approach might be, even as simple as saying the same thing but saying it in a different way, which would be that, here's a thing that sometimes when people do, it makes me, maybe as a person of color, somebody would be saying, it makes me feel attacked because of my race. I
Hmm.
know that you probably don't mean to do that, but that's how it makes me feel.
Hmm.
I, th
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
intent versus impact.
right. And I think
Your
people,
intention wasn't there, but the impact happened.
right. And I think if we communicate stuff like that way,
Hmm.
I think instead of getting defensive, oftentimes people would say, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that that's how that was impacting you."
Hmm.
And that those. So I think I'm just a big believer in rhetoric. Like
Hmm.
the way we say it, like
Hmm.
matters so much. And in classrooms, especially, we as teachers, we model that. Like
Absolutely.
we model that when we overhear our students saying insensitive things. We model that by how we react to them. Those types of things are very, very important.
Hmm.
So Kelsey, first of all, I appreciate you being so open with me about this topic. I was
Absolutely.
not sure how much we'd be able to dig into it. This has been fun. If
Yeah.
it's okay, let's kind of shift to the end of the conversation and lighten it up a little bit,
Yes.
and talk about choir.
This is the Choralosophy
Yes.
podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is really good. We talk about stuff like this all the time, though. But I'm interested now in so if we kind of take this into a little bit of a lighter place as we wrap up. What is your favorite part about being a choir director? Like, what are the things that give you the most joy about your job?
Um, my kids laughing. Oh, their laughter is like the funniest thing. I think I'm a stand-up comedian in my classroom. They might argue against that and they just say, Ms. Berger, you're just embarrassing, and we laugh at you. But I think they're laughing with me. But no, that's my favorite thing. And it's a privilege to be a 7 through 12 teacher because I get to start them and then I get to see them finish.
Yeah.
Um, this past April when we took Shades of Blue to ICHSA Nationals, like I'm watching those kids, every single one of them had started in the middle school a cappella group, and there they were on one of the biggest stages in a cappella. So that's so fun. And then getting to travel with them, like I love traveling with choir kids. One time I went on the school-wide Washington, D.C. trip, and I was like, I'm not traveling with non-choir children ever again. It was a very different clientele.
Yeah.
Um, so traveling with choir kids is awesome.
Well, and traveling with the choir, like, well, just in general, traveling with kids that you've made a relationship with and you've built a trust with is
Hmm.
way less stressful
Yeah.
because
Yeah, and I think that's why I struggled on that DC trip is I had a lot of
yeah,
kids that I didn't have a relationship with and didn't know. So it's like
yep,
maybe if I did that again, they can put all the choir kids on a bus and like I'll do that bus.
there you go, there you go. Well, if you were to add like kind of articulate a set of goals that you would have, because it sounds like if you're 18-ish years into teaching, is that right? 18 years, is
Yes,
that what you said?
18. Yep.
So I'm only a few years older than you, just a couple, or have been teaching longer. We'll say that.
Hmm.
But so we're in about the same part of our career,
Hmm.
approximately. And so I'll say this in this way: if you could articulate some goals for kind of that final third, so to speak,
Hmm.
of your like kind of public school, our typical 30 years that we teach.
Yeah.
What do you want to achieve still that you feel like you have not yet achieved, or is there anything?
Ooh. It's funny when I finished my master's degree was like a huge goal of mine, because I was like, this is a big thing I want to get done. And when I finished, I had like this identity crisis moment. I was like, what do I do next? This is like my big thing, and so I got involved in ACDA, and so that was a big goal of mine. I have started doing some conducting of honor choirs, which has been really fun just locally here. So I want to keep doing that and doing that even on a bigger scale. I'm actually thinking about getting another master's degree.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
crazy in either literacy or trauma-based social work. I don't know which. I think it's my ADHD. I just have a lot of interest, but that is kind of where I'm going with that. And then hopefully in the next couple summers, I'm going to head out to California to do the YPC national program with the Young People's Chorus of New York City. I was able to connect with them at ACDA National this past February, and I've always admired Francisco Nunez and their mission and their
Oh, yeah.
ability to bring every type of kid together under this one incredible product that comes out of there. So those are some things I have in my pocket for now.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
very cool. What is your biggest teaching insecurity?
That I fail a kid.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I think words are so powerful, and that if I say something and that destroys a kid, I never ever want to make a kid feel less than. But we're human beings and we make mistakes, and I just hope that when my kid leaves my room every day, that they've had fun at some point in my classroom, and so that's something I worry about a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel I would echo that.
Hmm.
For me personally, um, I am the type of teacher who, like, I run a very fast-paced classroom.
Same.
Like,
Hmm.
we are constantly, the bell rings, we start singing, and we sing until the bell rings, and it's very, very quick, and it's always sing, 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 quick instruction, sing again, quick
Hmm.
instruction, sing again. Like, they're just constantly singing, and um, and they're very self-sufficient. And so one of the things that happens in that environment, as I try to go to keep the pace up, is that sometimes I will find the quickest way to deliver information,
Hmm.
which is most of the time good, until I don't pick up on the fact that there's a kid who needs to slow down and have their feelings recognized.
Hmm.
And so the way it has been sometimes, the one thing I am very proud of with my classroom and in our culture is that when at certain levels, if I cross over the line or hurt somebody's feelings, I have a good enough rapport with students that they will tell me,
Hmm.
and or they will say, "Mr. Muntz, you ran over somebody again today."
Hmm. Yeah.
And then I'm able to reckon with that and go talk to that student and say, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself today, and breezed right past your concern, or whatever it is. And so, but when you say that you'll fail a kid, that's probably my insecurity too, is that I'm always worried about the kid who would fall through the cracks, so to
Hmm.
speak. Yeah, because you mentioned having a lot of students. We have our choirs are big too. My biggest
Hmm.
group is 100,
Hmm.
and so like getting 100 kids to feel like they're valued,
Hmm.
when they're all in the room at the same time, they're all there at the same time, and
Hmm.
there's only so much of me, to go around. That's probably my biggest insecurity, is that a kid would come into my classroom of 100, leave at the end of the school year, and not really ever feel like they were as important.
Hmm.
And so I have nightmares about that.
Yeah, I had a student several years ago. It's probably been about 10 years. Her name was Sophia Margiata, and she passed away very suddenly of
Mm.
undiagnosed leukemia. And I remember when we got the news that she passed away, I had to think about like it took me a minute to remember the last time she was in my class. She'd been absent for 5 days because they thought she had the flu, and then she passed away. And it hurt me because I couldn't remember seeing her eyes and seeing her face before we never saw her again. And so from that point on, I made it really intentional that I would make direct eye contact with every single one of my kids. Even if I didn't have a conversation with them that day, I would make sure that I looked them directly in the eye at some point in the rehearsal so they know that I saw them.
Yeah.
Um, do I get it every day? No, because there are a lot of kids, and like you said, it's fast paced. But it's something that's really, really important to me for these kids.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if you've seen this where you are, but the most recent fad, or one of the recent fads in education, is the whole, you've got to greet every kid at the door kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. I would love to do that. I have 100 kids.
Mm-hmm.
By the time,
It will
by the
take me
time
half my class to
Right.
agree to every
Exactly,
kid.
exactly. But I understand why that's being encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, in choir, sometimes when we have bigger groups and bigger class sizes, we have to figure out other ways. And I love that the idea of the eye contact thing. That's a great
Mm-hmm.
idea of just like
Mm-hmm.
trying to be intentional about finding a kid who like with your eyes that you haven't found recently or that you haven't found
Mm-hmm.
yet today,
Mm-hmm.
or even just one thing I'll do is when I'm conducting. I
Mm-hmm.
will try to be intentional about like which part of the choir have I not
Mm-hmm.
checked in with, because
Mm-hmm.
the group is so big that I am really like scanning
Mm-hmm.
this big space, and I sometimes have to like, oh, I haven't looked up at the back of the tenor twos lately, and making sure that I can check in with them and just give them some like even positive feedback, like a thumbs up while we're going through a song, or it's amazing to how much kids just need to be checked in with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
For
awesome.
sure.
That's awesome. Well, Kelsey, do you have? This has been great. I don't want to take any more of your time. This has been a really awesome conversation. What I'm curious on the way out, though, is there anything that about any of the things we've talked about that I just didn't let you say that you'd like to get in there, or any final thoughts?
No, we didn't talk about ACDA much.
Oh
So I'd
yeah,
like to give them a shout out.
yes, please.
Um, so one of the reasons I got involved in ACDA is because I saw the intentional work ACDA was doing as an organization to give more seats at the table to more
Hmm.
voices.
Yeah.
Um, and then, so I was, like you mentioned, I'm the co-chair now, one of the national co-chairs for contemporary commercial choirs, focusing on show choirs and contemporary a cappella groups. And so it's been really exciting to see ACDA giving a platform to those types of groups. One thing we're working on right now, Rob Dietz is my co-chair, who's like
Yeah.
a god. So like Rob's got everything. And funnily enough, I've known Rob for several years because he's one of our arrangers for our groups too. But giving access to more arrangers. So, because so many times in these reading sessions, we get stuck with these big publishers. And so we're trying to get Arrange Me and other sources out there for directors to access pieces, particularly beginning groups. Not everyone has the resources to do custom arrangements like a lot of show choirs and a cappella groups do. And so that's a big intention. And then getting these groups at conference, performing at conference. Southwestern is killing it. They are going to have a college contemporary a cappella honor choir, a high school contemporary a cappella honor choir, and then they're having a whole contemporary concert night, their first night of their conference. I kind of want to go to Colorado for their conference
That's
in
awesome.
2024 because they're doing it. But ACDA has been amazing. Robin, our executive director, is so wonderful and is doing so much. So shout out to ACDA. I'm really excited to be involved with them.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I agree. Robin is doing a great job,
Hmm.
kind of reinvigorating the culture of the organization,
For
and
sure.
yeah, it's going to be, I think, a great future. Sadly, I can't go to Colorado. That would be my convention, so
Mm,
I'm in Southwest region, but
okay.
it's on the week of our solo and small ensemble.
Oh, conferences in February and March. That's a whole
I
other
know. I
podcast,
know.
right?
Yep. So what I do is I typically go to someone else's region
Mm,
on a different weekend, and even if I have to go a little further, although this year it's interesting because we now have a Midwest region, which is relatively new,
right.
and ironically, I'm not in it. So I'm in Missouri, but I'm not in the Midwest region. I'm in the
Hmm.
Southwest, and so the Midwest is in Omaha, which is only like a 3 hour drive from where I live. It's closer
Hmm.
than my own region.
I'm in the same situation. Like
Yeah,
Southern is in Louisville, Kentucky, which is like 2 hours from here,
yeah,
and I can't get to Omaha. So yeah, I totally get that.
yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for chatting with me. This has been a blast, and
Thanks so much for having me.
I think people will enjoy it.
Thanks.
Thank you, as always, for listening to the end of the episode. I hope you appreciated, as I did, the vulnerability that Kelsey showed there to talk us through her own identity journey. And we all have some type of an identity journey to go on for ourselves. And so it's nice to have that example of Kelsey kind of talking through in front of a whole bunch of her colleagues what she is, how her thoughts have evolved on who she is and how that translates into her classroom. So thank you, Kelsey. Don't forget, if you enjoy this show and you want to make sure that it continues, then the things that you can do to help are like, share, subscribe, leave comments. Use the Choralosophy checkout code to get you a discount, which also helps me a lot, at sightreadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, mychoirrobes.com. You can also do it at graphitepublishing.com and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of these awesome companies will give you a discount because you listen to this show. So help us out. And of course, join the Patreon, patreon.com/Choralosophy, as little as $3 a month. But continue to join the conversation over at Choralosopher's Facebook page. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.